Dr. Renata Voss had been rehearsing her opening remarks for the accreditation panel since 4:30 that morning, and she had no room left for the name of the man carrying a tool bag through her hospital's East Service corridor. He was already there when she arrived at St. Laurent Medical Centre at 6:20 a.m., crouched beside an access panel near the secondary mechanical room, a compact man in his late 40s, gray at the temples, with the unhurried stillness contractors develop after years working around people for whom urgency is a clinical state. Plain gray jacket, steel-toed boots that had seen real use, a canvas tool bag older than some of her residents. Renata gave him about 1 second of attention. He was handling whatever Marcus had called about last night, the pressure irregularity in the east wing ventilation loop, and was therefore someone else's problem until further notice. She said nothing. She kept walking. The accreditation review was everything. 3 years of preparation, 47 updated protocols, 11 staff training cycles, and a morning that had to go perfectly from the first handshake to the final walkthrough. The Accreditation Canada panel arrived at 9. St. Laurent was one of 4 regional hospitals under review this cycle, and the last hospital in this district to fail its review had not been treated gently by the board. Renata Voss had not become chief medical officer at 39 by failing things she could control. Marcus Tran, the hospital's director of facilities, had phoned her at 10:47 the previous evening with the careful voice he used when something was genuinely wrong. The East Wing's air handling unit, the one servicing the surgical suites and 3 ICU bays, was showing pressure readings outside its acceptable variance band. Not dramatically, but accreditation assessors read mechanical logs, and a pressure irregularity on a surgical suite system, flagged the morning of a review, was the kind of detail that could change the temperature of an entire day. Marcus had a contractor lined up through the facility's service network, reliable, experienced with hospital environments, on site by 6 to assess and hopefully resolve before the panel arrived. Renata had said fine and hung up and gone back to her notes. She hadn't asked anything more about him. His name was Graham Ellison. 47 years old, he'd driven himself over in a 10-year-old pickup he kept in careful repair, arriving at 5:45 and signing in before the overnight security supervisor had finished his coffee. He asked 3 questions about the system, listened without writing anything down, and went straight to the access panel without needing to be led. He had a son, Owen, 10, still asleep when Graham left, with instructions on the kitchen counter about frozen waffles and a reminder that the bus came at 8:17, not 8:20, and that the difference mattered more than Owen currently believed. Graham worked through the early morning the way he approached most things. No urgency that wasn't warranted, no conversation that wasn't necessary. A quality of attention that looked, to anyone passing, like simple competence. He traced the pressure variance to a failing actuator in the secondary damper array within 40 minutes, and had a replacement sourced from his truck before the day shift arrived. At 7:15 his phone buzzed on the edge of the tool bag. He set down the torque wrench and answered, "Dad, I can't find my permission slip." Graham leaned against the wall the way people do when a conversation needs their full presence, regardless of where they're standing. Blue folder, second shelf of the bookcase. Behind the library book you haven't returned. A pause, small footsteps. It was there. I know. How did you know where the library book was? I'm the one who moves it when I vacuum. You never notice. Owen made the sound of someone discovering an injustice he couldn't immediately argue with. Graham reminded him Mrs. Okonkwo's number was on the fridge, that there was juice in the door, and that he'd be home by 5 unless something came up, in which case he'd call first. I know, Dad, Owen said in the tone of a boy who'd heard it all before and hadn't decided whether to find it comforting or mildly insulting. The call lasted 2 minutes and 12 seconds. Renata passed the corridor again at 7:30 on her way to the conference suite. The contractor was still there, one panel removed, working with the absorbed focus of someone who'd found exactly the problem he expected. She didn't slow down. He was handling it. That was what he was there for. She had looked at Graham Ellison twice now, and seen the same thing both times. A competent tradesman doing a contracted job. She had filed him accordingly. What she hadn't seen, because she hadn't been paying the kind of attention that would let her see it, was how he read the mechanical schematics the way a fluent reader reads a page, not translating but understanding. How his hands moved with a precision that was exact rather than merely careful, the difference being calibration instead of effort. He had learned to work that way in places where imprecision didn't cost a callback or a warranty claim, where it cost lives. Those places were behind him now, or so the arrangement went. He was a contractor. He contracted. The panel arrived at 8:58, 2 minutes early. Dr. Patricia Hollingsworth leading, 2 clinical reviewers, and a facilities specialist named Bernard Cook, with a clipboard and an eye for mechanical and safety systems. Renata shook each hand with practiced warmth and unpracticed steadiness, then led them into the orientation briefing. Marcus appeared at the conference room door at 9:17, wearing the look she'd learned, over 3 years, to take seriously. She excused herself. He found the root cause, Marcus said quietly. Actuator failure, replaced. But there's a secondary issue. The north loop isn't restoring pressure properly after the swap. He thinks there's a software calibration offset that's been accumulating for months, and the new actuator just exposed it. Control systems, not mechanical. Can it be fixed before Cook's walkthrough? Trying to find out. How long? He needs to get into the building management system. He's not certain of the timeline. Walkthroughs at 2. I know. She went back in and settled her expression and returned to the morning's work. Graham, meanwhile, was in the facilities office working through a calibration sequence most technicians would have needed the original installer's documentation to attempt. He didn't have it. He had a thorough grasp of the underlying control logic and the patience to work from first principles. More reliable than documentation anyway, since documentation described what a system was supposed to do, and he cared about what it was actually doing. At 11:40 he found it, not a single fault but a cascading offset from an intake sensor miscalibrated during the last maintenance cycle, quietly drifting for 11 months. The system had been compensating, the way systems do, until the failing actuator removed one of the compensation mechanisms and made the underlying problem visible. He corrected the offset, reset the compensation parameters, ran 3 verification cycles. Readings across all loops returned to normal variance. He texted Marcus, "Done, should hold. Call if it reads outside band after 2 hours." Then he packed his tools. Renata found out at 12:15 when Marcus slipped her a note during the clinical systems review. Resolved. Full system normal. She read it, kept her face exactly as it was, and returned to Dr. Hollingsworth's question about sepsis protocol documentation. She hadn't expected anything different. He'd been hired to fix it. He'd fixed it. That was the transaction. She didn't think about him again until 1:45, when the facility's walkthrough was underway in the East Wing, and Bernard Cook was moving through the corridor with his clipboard, and she noticed a small disturbance that had nothing to do with the review. 2 soldiers in Canadian Armed Forces uniforms stood near the East Service entrance. Not unusual on its own, St. Laurent held a contract with National Defense, but these 2 weren't moving. They faced down the corridor, and the older of them, a warrant officer whose posture didn't relax in civilian buildings, had his hand raised to the brim of his cap in a salute that was not informal, not a passing courtesy. It meant something specific. The younger soldier followed a beat later, with the automatic precision of someone responding to a thing he'd been trained to recognize on instinct. Graham Ellison was at the far end of the corridor, tool bag over one shoulder, walking toward the exit. He stopped. He set the bag down. He returned the salute, one clean, complete motion, and gave a single nod. The warrant officer lowered his hand and crossed the distance in a few deliberate steps, extending his hand with both of his own, briefly, the way people grip a hand when the gesture carries more than a greeting. Renata couldn't hear what passed between them. She could see Graham listen, nod, say something short that made the warrant officer close his eyes for exactly 1 second before opening them and nodding back. Bernard Cook had stopped walking, watching the corridor with the particular attention people give to something that seems important but that they lack context for. Renata realized she was wearing the same expression. Graham picked up his bag, said a word to the second soldier, and left through the East Service exit. The soldiers stood a moment longer before moving on. Renata stood in the corridor and did not, for 3 full seconds, think about the accreditation walkthrough. Then Cook asked a question about ventilation compliance documentation, and she answered it, and she did what the morning required. But something had shifted in the architecture of her attention. The way you feel a door left slightly open in a room where you expected every door closed. The clinical walkthrough finished at 3:45. The assessors were collegial and thorough and gave nothing away, as they were trained not to. Renata saw them out, exchanged the correct courtesies, and stood a moment in the empty lobby after the doors closed. She found Marcus in the facilities office. "The contractor," she said. "Graham Ellison, tell me about him." Marcus set down his pen, and the pause before he spoke was less hesitation than care. "Came through the service network, strong references, worked hospital systems before, 2 other facilities in the region. What else? He's very good. The calibration fault he found today, I don't know that anyone else we could have called on short notice would have caught it before the walkthrough." The soldiers in the East Corridor, they knew him. "I think so." That wasn't a casual greeting. "No," Marcus said, "it wasn't." She asked him directly whether he'd known who Graham Ellison was before that morning. Marcus looked at his desk. "I recognized the name. Wasn't sure it was the same person until I saw him." "Same person as who?" A longer pause. "My brother worked for Public Works Infrastructure Division. He was on the assessment team at Pemberton Station in 2019. There was an incident, structural, during a D&D training exercise. A building partially failed, 23 people inside." He stopped. "My brother was on the civilian support team. He doesn't talk about it much. But he talks about the engineer." Another stop. "That's all I'm going to say. It's not my story." Renata went back to the East Corridor and stood there, a moment the access panel latched and quiet. Then she found Donna Hewitt, who'd run hospital administration at St. Laurent for 26 years and seemed to know everyone who'd ever worked in or around the building, and asked if the name Graham Ellison meant anything to her. "The fellow who fixed the ventilation this morning." "Yes." Donna's face did something complicated. "I've heard that name, not connected to here. My brother-in-law's a structural engineer. Mentioned it once at Christmas dinner, then said he didn't want to talk about it at Christmas dinner." She looked at Renata. "Said there were people who thought that man should have been given a medal, and that he'd made it very clear he didn't want one." Renata had her assistant pull whatever existed on a Graham Ellison contractor, formerly Department of National Defense. What came back 40 minutes later was thin. A Professional Engineers of Ontario registration, current and in good standing, a sole proprietorship 2.5 years old, an address in East End, Ottawa, an employment history with 1 line before the contract work, Government of Canada, Department of National Defense, Engineering and Infrastructure, 2006 to 2021. No branch, no detail. When her assistant tried to pull more, he hit not a gap but a deliberate restriction, the kind placed intentionally on files someone had decided shouldn't be generally accessible. She went back to the East Corridor and found the warrant officer finishing his business at the security desk. She asked him plainly who the man was that he'd saluted. He looked at her for a moment, a large man in his 50s, a face that had learned to hold its own counsel. A good man, he said. That was more than recognizing a good man. He held her gaze. Ma'am, there are men you know from briefing documents, and men you know from being there. A pause. I was there. He went back to the form he was signing. She didn't press further. She'd built her career on knowing the difference between a door that would open with more pressure and one that wouldn't, and his tone had told her, without ambiguity, which kind this was. She went to her office and stood at the window, looking at the parking lot and the ordinary gray of a Wednesday afternoon in Ottawa, and let herself think about the morning the way she rarely allowed herself to think during working hours. Without an agenda, without a conclusion already waiting to be confirmed. She had worked with tradespeople, technicians, engineers of every kind. She knew how to read competence in a room, or she'd believed she did. But what she'd seen in the East Corridor, in the quality of the man's work, and in the way two soldiers had stopped and raised their hands, was not a vocabulary she'd encountered together before. A building failing in Northern Ontario in November. 23 people inside. A name a structural engineer wouldn't discuss at Christmas dinner. The document reached her the next morning through no channel she'd planned for. The facility's assessment report needed signatures from several parties, and in gathering them, a supplementary file came out of the board liaison's office. Routine contractor service records. Graham Ellison's profile was in it. Clipped to the back, misfiled from a separate package, was a printout of a Government of Canada internal commendation summary. From the same database her assistant hadn't been able to access. She knew she wasn't supposed to read it. She told herself she'd return it. That lasted about 30 seconds. 4 pages, mostly administrative language, reference numbers, unit designations, assessment criteria, until the 3rd page, where the language went plain the way government documents sometimes do when the events outrun standard phrasing. Graham Thomas Ellison, P.Eng., Civilian Infrastructure Lead, D&D Engineering and Infrastructure Division, deployed in support of domestic emergency response. Pemberton Station, Northern Ontario, November 2019. Structural failure during a Canadian Armed Forces winter training exercise. Partial collapse of an administrative and communications facility. 23 military and civilian personnel confirmed inside at time of failure, including 2 with critical injuries. External temperatures at -27 Celsius. Emergency response assets estimated 14 hours from site. Ellison had been on site by coincidence, part of a pre-deployment infrastructure assessment team. He assumed coordination of the structural stabilization effort within the first 20 minutes. The document laid out, in its careful neutral language, what that meant. Improvised shoring from equipment on 2 transport vehicles, a continuous structural monitoring protocol maintained by hand after the electronic sensors lost power at hour 9, a decision at hour 31, against the recommendation of the Remote Emergency Management Advisory Team to reinforce the east wall rather than evacuate through the compromised north corridor. Post-incident structural analysis confirmed the decision had been correct. Had it gone the other way, 11 people sheltering in that section would have died. 61 hours, 23 people, all of them out. At the bottom of the 3rd page, in the handwriting of a senior D&D official. Recommended for civilian commendation, order of merit, infrastructure. Recommendation declined by subject. Reason given, does not wish recognition. Honored. And below it, in a different, smaller hand. His wife passed 8 months after. He left the same week. We didn't try to hold him. Renata set the document down and looked at the window for a long time. She thought about the morning she'd just lived through, walking past him without a word, handing the problem to Marcus, reducing him to a variable and moving on. She thought about how cleanly she'd read him: competent tradesman, contracted job, resolved situation, next item. She thought about -27 degrees and 61 hours and 11 people behind an east wall. And a decision made without complete information, and the specific kind of nerve that isn't trained so much as revealed. She thought about a boy she hadn't yet learned the name of, asking about a permission slip while his father crouched in a hospital corridor at 7 in the morning. His wife passed 8 months after. He left the same week. She understood it slowly. He hadn't left because the work had beaten him. He'd left because the work asked him to be elsewhere for the better part of a decade. And the person who'd held things together while he was gone too now. And there was a child who needed a father who was actually present. He'd looked at all of it and made a calculation that had nothing to do with career trajectory or professional recognition or the recruiting pipeline that would have paid him considerably more than sole proprietorship building systems work in Ottawa. He'd chosen the permission slip on the kitchen counter, the frozen waffles, the bus at 8:17, not 8:20. She had looked at a man in a gray work jacket with a well-used tool bag and read him as exactly what he appeared to be, without once considering that what a person appears to be and what a person is are rarely the same thing. She hadn't gotten a detail wrong. She'd gotten the category wrong entirely. She called the service network for his contact information, which they gave her without difficulty, and reached him that afternoon. He answered on the second ring, his voice the same as it had been in the corridor, unhurried, without performance. She told him she'd seen the document, that she knew it wasn't something he'd meant for her to see, and that she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She told him she owed him an apology, and gave it without shrinking it to something smaller than it was. He was quiet a moment. You needed the problem resolved, he said. It was resolved. That's not actually an answer to an apology. No, he said, it isn't. She asked if he'd come back to the hospital the next morning. There was something she wanted to say in person. He arrived at 7:50, signed in, and found her waiting in the East Service corridor, not her office, not a conference room, but the corridor itself, which she'd decided was the right place. She repeated what she'd said on the phone, unmodified. He listened with the same attention he gave everything. When she finished, he said, "You made a reasonable assessment with what you had. I don't exactly go around contradicting it. That doesn't make the assessment right." No, but it makes it understandable. Understandable isn't the same as acceptable. He considered that. What would you like to do about it? Not a challenge, a real question. She'd thought about it. I'd like to offer you a contract. Ongoing facilities systems, consulting, this hospital and 2 others in the district, 3 days a week, pay commensurate with your background. He looked at her. 3 days, the other 4 belong to my son. Done. Marcus appeared from the facilities office doorway, not entirely by accident, and crossed to Graham with the deliberateness of someone who'd been waiting for the moment to arrive. He put out his hand. My brother was at Pemberton Station, he said. He's never told me exactly what happened, but he's told me your name. He paused. He was in the East section. He's been home for 6 years because of what you did. He coaches hockey on Saturdays now. 2 kids. I wanted you to know that someone who was there has a brother who works in this building. Graham held his hand a moment. How is he? He's well. Something moved through Graham's face, brief and full, the most unguarded version of him she'd seen. Good, he said quietly. That's good. They were still standing there when Warrant Officer Dale Kasprick came through, leaving after a follow-up appointment, not expecting to find anyone he recognized. He stopped, then crossed the corridor. Sir. A beat. Warrant Officer Dale Kasprick. I was at Pemberton. 2nd rotation, hours 18 through 40. I remember. You held the east wall. We held the east wall, Graham said. Kasprick's jaw tightened. There's a group of us, the men who were inside. Standing dinner once a year every November. A pause. There's always a place set for you. We don't take it away. We understand why you don't come, he said. We just want you to know it's there. Graham said nothing for a moment. Down the corridor, the young private who'd been with Casperdrick that first day and had no personal connection to Pemberton, he'd only heard the story from a sergeant his first week, raised his hand in a full, clean salute because it felt like the true thing to do, and no one had told him not to. Casperdrick raised his hand as well. Graham returned it, one motion, complete, then lowered his hand, and the corridor went quiet except for the steady hum of an air handling unit running within all its correct parameters. Thank you, warrant officer, he said. Sir. They left. Renata stood in the east corridor and felt something settle into place. About that morning, and the one before, and a great many mornings she couldn't specifically account for but understood now had been shaped by the same habit of attention. What it cost to see only what you'd prepared yourself to see. How efficient that habit was, and how much it flattened along the way. Before he left, she asked about his son. His face did the thing it had done at the mention of Marcus's brother coaching hockey. Owen, he said, 10. Plays defense, reads too slowly, argues too quickly, has his mother's way of coming at a problem from a direction nobody else thought to try. A pause. He's going to be fine. She believed him without question. In the months that followed, people who worked with Renata Voss noticed a change they couldn't quite name. Nothing dramatic, a shift in the temperature of her attention. She started pausing in the service corridors. She learned the overnight housekeeping staff's names, then their children's, and asked after them by name. She arrived at department head meetings 5 minutes early and spent those minutes asking whoever was already in the room something that had nothing to do with the agenda. She stopped treating job titles as complete accounts of the people holding them. At the hospital's year-end address, she said something her senior team would repeat for years. I've spent my career being good at rapid assessment, efficient triage of information, including people. I'm working on being less efficient about that. Efficient and accurate aren't the same thing, and the gap between them is where most of the important information lives. Nobody who heard it knew the morning it came from. She never told them that felt right. Graham took the consulting contract. 3 days a week at the district's facilities, Fridays and weekends untouched. No apology attached. The arrangement wasn't negotiable. Saturdays he stood at the boards of the Elmvale Park Arena and watched Owen play defense for the Stingrays, a team with a middling record and a very good time, offering coffee cup encouragement that was specific rather than generic, because Owen could tell the difference. Sunday mornings he made pancakes, and Owen complained about them in a cheerful ritual that had built its own logic over 2 years. And Graham listened as though what was being said was worth hearing, because to him, it was. He didn't seek recognition. People who'd served alongside him knew where to find him and called sometimes, and he answered warmly and kept it brief. People who passed him in a grocery store or a school hallway saw a quiet man in ordinary clothes and formed an impression that was, in nearly every way that mattered, incomplete. He had made his peace with that. There is a particular dignity in the space between who you are and what you appear to be. When the gap is chosen deliberately, when it costs nothing that matters, and protects something that cost everything. Graham Ellison wore the ordinary version of himself. Contractor father, man in well-used steel-toed boots, the way someone wears a thing they've settled internally and found no reason to revisit. And on November evenings, in a private room of a restaurant in the Byward Market, 12 men sat down to dinner. 11 of them were there. One place was always set. The chair was never taken away, and neither was the understanding that the man who should have filled it had chosen something he valued more, and that every one of them, without exception, thought that was exactly right.